The Chinese men's soccer team was recently humiliated by Japan in an important game. In its wake, scathing attacks have been directed at the Chinese leadership, which has overseen the decimation of Chinese soccer. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell, and mark your calendars, my friends. This Saturday, October 5th, at 8 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time, I will be hosting a special live stream celebrating you for helping us reach 2 million subscribers. And you'll want to be there. There will be some big announcements about the future of the show, and Matt Shelley and I will do something we've never done before. Again, that's Saturday, October 5th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. See you there. And now, on with the show. So if you're a Chinese person who's feeling kind of lost, then Xi Jinping wants you to pay attention, because he's not just the Chinese leader, he's also China's compass in chief. Which makes sense, since compasses are magnetic, and Xi repels everyone. Since Xi came to power more than 10 years ago, a long list has emerged of all the policy issues where he has pointed the way forward. These range from very specific topics like pointing the way forward on the distribution of medical and educational resources in Xiong'an New District, to vague and broad topics like pointing the way forward on building a better world. Often the compass-in-chief likes to point the way towards extending Chinese supremacy in one field or another. And that includes one of Xi's absolute favorites, soccer. He is reportedly a big soccer fan. Possibly because that's the only way he can see China reach any goals. So for a sport where games sometimes end 0-0, it wasn't exactly welcome news for Xi when the Chinese men's team lost 7-0 to Japan in a World Cup qualifying game earlier this month. Their worst defeat in a World Cup qualifying game ever. But hey, it happens. The important thing is that you shake it off and win the next one, which they didn't do. A few days later, they lost again, this time to Saudi Arabia at home. There are an estimated 187 million soccer fans in China, and they had plenty to say on Chinese social media about the losses, in particular the enormous spanking from Japan, China's rival. This is humiliating, one fan wrote on the social media platform Weibo after the game. Another called the day of defeat the most shameful day for Chinese football, that had left a pain that can never be erased. Oh, I don't think so. This is China after all. Anything can be erased. Even massacres, assuming any ever happened, which they definitely didn't in Tiananmen Square in 1989. Less than 24 hours after the defeat, it became a top trending topic on Weibo, with more than 460 million views. But the most important question was, who's to blame? Chinese state media rushed to the scene to explain the situation, and to them, it was clear as day that the problem is the soccer team's head coach, Branko Ivankovic from Croatia, who has been called incompetent by several outlets since the defeats. A Chinese organization with incompetent leadership? Now why does that sound so familiar? People's Daily wrote about Ivankovic in a commentary that a useless general will waste 3 armies, essentially saying that Ivankovic is a hopeless leader that squandered an excellent setup. But the story from People's Daily quickly attracted criticism online, with users accusing the media outlet of using the head coach, who's only had the job for 7 months, as a scapegoat. What? Communists claiming to have all the answers, but all they can do is blame a scapegoat? I've never heard that one before. Although the big loss to Japan was a shock, bad soccer results for the Chinese men's team very much precede Ivankovic. The team hasn't qualified for the World Cup in more than 20 years, and with the recent defeats, it looks unlikely that they'll do it for the next one, hosted by the US, Canada, and Mexico in 2026. Even the US qualified for the World Cup, and we don't even like soccer here. Probably because we Americans don't appreciate anything that takes away the right to use our arms. Many social media users therefore made the case that the problem runs much deeper, with some arguing that the blame should be laid at the feet of a different useless general, the general who has pointed the way forward for Chinese football for years now. One person wrote online that whoever points out the direction for Chinese football should stand up and take responsibility. And another said that Winnie is to blame for pointing in the wrong direction. Since Xi became the nation's compass-in-chief, Chinese soccer has indeed been on quite a roller coaster ride. In 2011, the year before Xi became the leader of the Chinese Communist Party, he reportedly told a South Korean politician that he has 3 wishes for China: to qualify for the World Cup in soccer, to host the World Cup, and to one day win the World Cup. So by the time Chinese media reported on Xi pointing the way forward for Chinese soccer back in 2017, the Chinese soccer industry had transformed. State-affiliated conglomerates had flooded the domestic Chinese soccer league with so much money that in the 2015-16 season, $451 million was spent on player transfers, taking the league into the top 5 spending leagues in the world, which should have been a red flag. Or yellow card? I told you, I'm American, we don't get soccer. China's private sector giants also entered the field, with property developer Evergrande acquiring the ownership of football club Guangzhou Evergrande FC, and the tech giant Alibaba taking a 50% stake in the same club a few years later. There was so much money raining down on Chinese soccer that foreign players from all over the world were pulled into the home league, with some of them even changing their nationality so they could play for the Chinese national team. If they made this into a TV show, it would be like Ted Lasso, but for people who think the adulterous billionaire Slimeball was the good guy. Several Brazilian players changed their nationality, and some even changed their name, like Ricardo Goulart, who became Gaulata, and Alan Carvalho, who became Alan. Flush with new money, new players, and new names, Chinese soccer looked poised to take over the world. But then COVID happened, abruptly ending the Chinese soccer surge, especially as the government began rolling out its draconian zero-COVID policy. Boy, I bet China was sure mad at the country responsible for spreading COVID around the world, America. After that, games faced sudden postponement and even cancellation, and those that were allowed to play were done so at empty stadiums. Playing in front of 0 fans? So they learned what it feels like to be a professional soccer player in America then. Empty stadiums not only hit gate receipts, but sponsorship deals too. Around the same time, the Chinese authorities launched a series of crackdowns against the private sector. The tech industry was hit particularly hard, and the government's intervention in the property sector burst the country's massive housing bubble, sparking a national property crisis. As a result, companies like Alibaba scaled down their soccer contributions, while Evergrande, which went bankrupt in the property collapse, lost its soccer stadium to the government and is expected to lose the rest of its soccer assets sooner or later. So China tackled them and forced a turnover on their field. They may be better at American football. And while Xi may love soccer, he loves a good crackdown even more. So of course, the soccer industry was not exempt from a barrage of arrests and shakeups as well. The clampdown on Chinese soccer is actually still going on, with the former head of the Chinese Football Association sentenced to life in prison earlier this year after he pleaded guilty to taking bribes worth around $11.2 million. I'm not sure what color card you pull for that big of a penalty. And earlier this month, the Chinese authorities banned 43 soccer players and officials for life for match fixing, which is crazy, because considering how many games end 0-0, they should thank people for throwing games so something actually happens in them. One of those banned is South Korean player Sun Jun-ho. Sun spent 10 months in Chinese detention, during which time he confessed to having participated in match fixing. But after he returned home to South Korea, he told a very different story.
정말 승부 조작을 한 적도 없고 가담한 적도 없습니다. 그들에게 진 거라는 것은 초기에 있었던 압박 수사를 통한 혐의를 인정하지 않을 경우 너의 와이프가 외교부를 통해 체포해서 네가 있는 지금 초양 구치소로 잡혀와서 같이 조사를 해야 된다며.
You know, investigated, a solid case of judicial fair play if ever there was one. With crises, crackdowns, and corruption cases coming at Chinese soccer from all directions, the Chinese Soccer League has teetered on the verge of collapse. In 2021, for example, in a spectacular turn of events, the Chinese club that won the top league title in 2020 announced that it was ceasing operations only a few months after winning the title. Well, I guess it's better to leave while on top. And by leave, I mean be forced to shut down because everything around you is such a dumpster fire on top. By 2023, 6 teams had withdrawn from the top league, with a total of 35 teams dropping out of Chinese soccer across all divisions. And from all divisions, foreign players have been leaving. Goulart left in 2021 after claiming his team, Guangzhou, had failed to pay his wages, and he's even renounced his Chinese nationality. What we don't know is if these days he prefers to go by Ricardo Goulart or Gao Late. So with all the financial and criminal calamities swirling around the people involved in Chinese soccer, it's no wonder that the sport is suffering and that Coach Xi is taking some heat. I'm actually surprised that the Chinese men's team didn't suffer a bigger defeat against Japan. After all, how can someone kick a soccer ball around and watch their back at the same time? It would be terrible if they were injured on the field and not just faking it for a change. Honestly, with all the sport's been through in China in recent years, I don't see how anyone could come out of that with a strong national team. Discussing the Chinese defeat to Japan online, one Chinese social media user argued that Xi should take responsibility not just for the failings of Chinese soccer, but for the general state of chaos and crisis as well. Do you know how bad of a national leader you have to be for citizens to blame you for sports losses? That would be like if the Yankees lost the World Series and someone slapped a Joe Biden "I did that" sticker on the stadium. But this makes sense because this is not just about bad coaching or demotivated players. It's obviously much bigger than that. The state of Chinese soccer is a prime example of how suffocating interventions by Xi's government are laying waste to entire industries. And for proof, look no further than the Chinese women's soccer team. As recently as 2022, they won the Asian Football Cup. Women's soccer in China has not been subjected to ceaseless crackdowns, which might go a long way in explaining the stark difference in results between the women's team and the men's team, which might be the first time that women's sports going ignored is actually a good thing. Indeed, following the men's defeat against Japan, prolific writer Tang Yin-hong wrote that in his opinion, soccer should be allowed to develop on its own, which is sound advice. Fortunately, leaving something to develop on its own is not really the Chinese leadership's speciality, especially not when it comes to stuff they have strong feelings about. Instead, it appears that if Xi dislikes you, he'll come at you with fire and fury. But if he loves you, he'll also come at you with fire and fury. Once China's compass in chief starts spinning, it's everyone else that gets to feel nauseous and repelled. And before YouTube sends you off to some random video, here's one I want to show you for my new show where I talk about things YouTube might consider too controversial by hiding it in gaming content. This one is about the normalization of deviance in the disaster of a game that was the new Star Wars Outlaws. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.